Somehow the railroad disappeared, as well as the train that was supposed to be here. I know I'm hearing music no one was ever to hear. Then it starts. A part of the sign begins to march to the station today. Looks like somebody has come out to play. A dumb kid making noise a bit like this. Trying hard to comprehend the words that fly over his head. Since then I haven't moved a single step in this place again today. No one can see me even if they tried. None can even catch me alive. So cross the rails at last and cast your gaze upon your feet, so the world won't see the raindrops on my cheeks. Where am I? What's the time? Looking around I was horrified. Nothing was there. Should it be that even kiss? I'm even never gone. So that's fine. Just because we need to face I couldn't sit and inside. Cracking my jaw to here, looking under. I only wanted to go meet a friend tonight, but it's over now, so good night. None can see me even if they tried. None can even catch me alive. So cross the rails today and cast your gaze upon your feet, so the stars to see the raindrops on my head. None can see me even if they tried. Where the hell am I doomed to never truly die? I tried my best to keep you safe and sound, but that wasn't quite enough to stop it, was it?
Just was up for 6 months. Yay else dick. I love you.
I did everything to be there by your side. So when you tell me I'm the reason, I just can't believe the lies. No, I just wanna call you. So get away, another way to be alright. You did all the songs to know and let yourself go. You know you did lose your self-control. This is no turn away, another way to be where you did all the songs to go.
Dearest Dog Army, today we're going to be reading Call of Cthulhu. I've been promising a story reading stream for about 6 months now. I do apologize. It was a rather nerve-wracking decision to be doing so. However, I will do my best. Yes, indeed. Woof. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to my story reading stream. I hope you are sitting comfortably. I hope you're enjoying yourself. I hope you have got a nice cold drink in hand. And I hope you will find the world of H.P. Lovecraft just as fascinating as myself. Thank you, Chelly, for the 7 months.
Chelly
underscore
thank you just resubbed for 7 months.
Thank you very much.
Merry Ink cheer free, Merry Ink cheer free, Merry Ink cheer free.
Thank you. I'm just going to be turning down the TTS a lot, so it doesn't distract. I'm in bed because I'm still sick, but I am comfy. That's good to hear, darling. I'm sorry you're sick, but I'm certain you will heal soon. Hello, Amber Pine. Nix, thank you for the 2 months up at 4 months. Thank you very much.
Nixon 1912 just resubbed for 4 months. Hi Mary, I just want to say thanks for always making me smile. Merry Ink Sparkles Free, Merry Ink Sparkles Free, and I love you so much. Merry Ink Love Free, Merry Ink Love Free. I hope you have a lovely day.
Thank you very much, Nix.
Zealot Champion 5G has just joined the Dog Army.
Thank you for joining. Thank you very much. Woof. What story will you read? Well, it's in the title of the stream, my dear friend. It's Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft, one of my favorite writers of all time. By the fact that he was a huge racist, but we don't talk about that. We don't talk about that. I mean, he was also very schizophrenic and would probably have been put in a mental institution. So, I'm not saying that excuses racism, but I'm saying there were circumstances, you know, that you got, one has to keep in mind. Like if you walk into a mental institution, you hear someone shouting a racial slur, you're probably going to be more likely to think, well, he is insane. So, you know, yep. But he was a brilliant writer. He was a marvelous writer, a man who has shaped horror as we know it to this day. It has inspired more video games and more genres than we possibly can know. It has reshaped horror of the modern day. It practically invented an entire genre. Yes. Hello, Risky Tilt. That's some introduction, man. I know. This is hard these days to mention H.P. Lovecraft without someone going, but he was a racist. Yes, he was racist. He was deeply racist, and I don't approve, but he was also mentally ill to a rather extreme degree. And he never earned a single penny off his works. Thank you, Ali, for the 100 bits. Thank you very much. And thank you for the hype train. Thank you. Woof. Thank you very much. Well, I mean, you can say he was classist, but the man was deeply poor. So I don't know which class you're referring to. He was deeply in poverty. He died of cancer that he couldn't afford to treat himself. But let's just stop talking about this stuff. It's depressing. Hi, Mary. Hello there, Yuki. Hello. How are you, Gitro? Hello, Astalosh. How are you guys? Are you doing alright today? I have been terrified of doing a reading stream for the longest time because I was afraid that you guys might find it boring and click off the stream. I thought I should focus on video games and stuff, even though I love to read. I love reading, very much so. Hello, Mary. Hello, Miyaza. I've had a very stressful day, but I'm so happy that we get to reading stream today. Well, I hope you enjoy it. So I was thinking very hard today. Should I be reading the story while I listen to music? Or should I just read the story with only my voice? What do you guys think? Because I do have a few soundtracks that can go along with Call of Cthulhu, but it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect. What do you think? Some background music. Ambiance. Ambiance. Yes. Okay. Library ambiance. Let's see. How's something like this in the background? What do you think? Thank you, Ghosty. Hello, lightsaber. What do you guys think of this in the background? Do you like it? Go on. Tell me. Give me feedback. Oh, thank you very much, Yanni. Thank you, darling. Okay. With music? I mean, as mentioned, I do have music. Just not quite sure how good it'll fit. I have this which I wrote Nyanna's Lore with. Love you, Mary. Love you too, Lit Puddings. Love you very much. Okay. We'll give it a try. We'll give it a try. Let's read together. I'll keep the book open so that you can join in reading as well, in case you don't understand what I'm saying. Alright. Let me just make sure that everything is good. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. I should probably start with the quote. Found among the papers of the late Francis Wayland Thurston of Boston. Of such great powers of beings there may be conceivably a survival of a hugely remote period when consciousness was manifested perhaps in shapes and forms long since withdrawn before the tide of advancing humanity. Forms of which poetry and legend alone have caught a flying memory and called them gods, monsters, mythical beings of all sorts and kind. Algernon Blackwood. Chapter 1. The Horror in Clay. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of a black sea of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but some day the piecing together of disassociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. Physiophists have guessed at the awesome grandeur of the cosmic cycle wherein our world and human race form transient incidents. They have hinted at strange survivals in terms which would freeze the blood if not masked by a bland optimism. But it is not from them that there came the single glimpse of forbidden eons which chills me when I think of it, and maddens me when I dream of it. That glimpse, like all dread glimpses of truth, flashed from out an accidental piecing together of separated things. In this case, an old newspaper item, and the notes of a dead professor. I hope that the separated things, in this case, an old newspaper item, and the notes of a dead professor. I hope that no one else will accomplish this piecing out. Certainly, if I live, I shall never knowingly supply a link in so hideous a chain. I think that the professor too intended to keep silent regarding the part he knew, and that he would have destroyed his notes had not sudden death seized him. My knowledge of all things began in the winter of 1926 to 27 with the death of my grand-uncle George Gamel Angle, Professor Emeritus of Semitic Languages in Brown University, Providence, Rhode Island. Professor Angle was widely known as an authority on ancient inscriptions and had frequently been resorted to by the heads of prominent museums so that his passing at the age of 92 may be recalled by many. Hold on, the music is a little too epic for this part. I'll leave it like this for now. You can try Mansions of Madness. Hero, I'm not even beginning with this one. Come on. Woof. Music doesn't fit this part. Let's try again. My knowledge of the thing began in the winter of 1926 to 27 with the death of my grand-uncle George Gamel Angle, Professor Emeritus of Semitic Languages in Brown University, Providence, Rhode Island. Professor Angle was widely known as an authority on ancient inscriptions and had frequently been resorted to by the heads of prominent museums so that his passing at the age of 92 may have been recalled by many. Locally, interest was intensified by the obscurity of the cause of death. The professor had been stricken whilst returning from the Newport boat, falling suddenly, as witnesses said, after having been jostled by a nautical-looking N-word. Fuck's sake. H.P. Lovecraft, Jesus Christ, you had to include that. Who had come from one of the queer dark courts of the precipitous hillside which formed a shortcut from the waterfront to the deceased home in William Street. Physicians were unable to find any visible disorder, but concluded after perplexed debate that some obscure lesions of the heart, included by the brisk ascent of so steep a hill by so elderly a man, was responsible for the end. At the time, I saw no reason to dissent from this dictum, but latterly, I am inclined to wonder, and more than wonder, as my grand-uncle's heir and executor, for he died a childless widower, I was expected to go over his papers with some thoroughness, and for that purpose moved his entire set of files and boxes to my quarters in Boston. Much of the material which I correlated will be later published by the American Archaeological Society, but there was one box which I found exceedingly puzzling, and which I felt much averse from showing to other eyes. It had been locked, and I did not find the key to which it It had been locked, and I did not find the key till it occurred to me to examine the personal ring which the professor carried always in his pocket. Then indeed I succeeded in opening it, but when I did, so seemed only to be confronted by a greater and more closely locked barrier, for that could be the meaning of the queer clay bas-relief, and the disjointed jottings, ramblings, and cuttings to which I found. Had my uncle in his latter years become credulous of the most superficial impostures, I resolved to search out the eccentric sculptor responsible for this apparent disturbance of the old man's peace of mind. Let me read chat for a second. Do you want me to make the text more visible? I can. I am capable of this. Do you want me to? Here we go. How about this? This better? Or perhaps like this? Is this okay? Okay. Let us continue with the story. The bas-relief was a rough rectangle less than an inch thick and about 5 by 6 inches in area. Obviously of modern origin, its designs, however, were far from modern in atmosphere and suggestion, for although the vagaries of cubism and futurism are many and wild, they do not often reproduce that cryptic regularity which lurks in prehistoric writing, and writing of some kind. The bulk of these designs seemed certainly to be, though my memory, despite much familiarity with the papers and collections of my uncle, failed in any way to identify this particular species or even to hint at its remotest affiliations. Above these apparent hieroglyphics was a figure of evidently pictorial intent, though its impressionistic execution forbade a very clear idea of its nature. It seemed to be a sort of monster, or symbol representing a monster, of a form which only deceased fancy could conceive. If I say that my somewhat extravagant imagination yielded simultaneous pictures of an octopus, a dragon, and a human caricature, I shall not be unfaithful to the spirit of the thing. A pulpy, tentacled head surmounted a grotesque and scaly body with rudimentary wings. But it was the general outline of the whole which made it most shockingly frightful. Behind the figure was a vague suggestion of a cyclopean architectural background. The writing accompanying this oddity was aside from a stack of press cuttings in Professor Angel's most recent hand, and made no pretense to literary style. What seemed to be the main document was headed Cthulhu Cult, in characters painstakingly printed to avoid the erroneous reading of a word so unheard of. The manuscript was divided into 2 sections. The first, which was headed 1925, Dream and Work of H.A. Wilcox, 7 Thomas Street, Providence, Rhode Island. And the second, Narrative of Inspector John R. Lagrasse, 121 Bienville, St. New Orleans, Los Angeles, at 9:08 AAS MGT. Notes on the same in Professor Webb's account. The other manuscript papers were all brief notes, some of them accounts of the queer dreams of different persons, some of them citations of philosophical books and magazines, notably W. Scott Eliot's Atlantis and the Lost Lemuria, and the rest comments on long-surviving secret societies and hidden cults, with references to passages in such mythological and anthropological source books as Fraser's Golden Bough and Miss Murray's Witch Cult in Western Europe. The cuttings largely alluded to outre mental illnesses and outbreaks of group folly or mania in the spring of 1925. The first half of the principal manuscript told a very peculiar tale. It appears that on March 1st, 1925, a thin, dark young man of neurotic and excited aspect had called upon Professor Angle, bearing the singular clay bas-relief, which was then exceedingly damp and fresh. His card bore the name of Henry Anthony Wilcox, and my uncle had recognized him as the youngest son of an excellent family slightly known to him, who had latterly been studying sculpture at Rhode Island School of Design and living alone at the Fleur-de-Lis building near that institution. Wilcox was a precocious youth of a known genius but great eccentricity, and had from childhood excited attention through the strange stories and odd dreams that he was in the habit of relating. He called himself psychically hypersensitive, but staid folk of ancient commercial city dismissed him as merely queer. Never mingling much with his kind, he had dropped gradually from social visibility and was now known only to a small group of aesthetes from other towns. Even the Providence Art Club, anxious to preserve its conservatism, had found him quite hopeless. On the occasion of the visit ran the professor's manuscript, the sculptor abruptly asked for the benefit of the host's archaeological knowledge in identifying the hieroglyphics on the bas-relief. Nejimora Jun, thank you for the tier 1 sub. He spoke in a dreamy, stilted manner which suggested pose and alienated sympathy, and my uncle shewed some sharpness in relying for the conspicuous freshness of the tablet implied kinship with anything but archaeology. Young Wilcox's rejoinder, which impressed my uncle enough to make him recall and record it verbatim, was of fantastically poetic cast, which must have typified his whole conversation, and which I have since found highly characteristic of him. He said, "It is new indeed, for I made it last night in a dream of strange cities, and dreams are older than brooding Tyre, or the contemplative Sphinx, or garden-girdled Babylon." It was then that he began that rambling tale which suddenly played upon a sleeping memory and won the fevered interest of my uncle. There had been a slight earthquake tremor the night before, the most considerable felt in New England for some years, and Wilcox's imagination had been keenly affected upon retiring. Upon retiring he had an unprecedented dream of great cyclopean cities of Titan blocks and sky-flung monoliths, all dripping with green ooze and sinister with latent horror. Hieroglyphics had covered the walls, and pillars from some undetermined point below had come a voice that was not a voice, a chaotic sensation which only fancy could transmute into sound, which he had attempted to render by almost unpronounceable jumble of letters. This verbal jumble was the key to the recollection which excited and disturbed Professor Angle. He questioned the sculpture with scientific minuteness, and studied with almost frantic intensity the bas-relief on which the youth had found himself working, chilled and clad only in his night clothes when walking had stolen bewilderingly over him, my uncle blamed his old age. Wilcox afterwards said for his slowness in recognizing both hieroglyphics and pictorial design, many of his questions seemed highly out of place to his visitor, especially those which tried to connect the latter with strange cults or societies, and Wilcox could not understand the repeated promises of silence which he was offered in exchange for admission of membership in some widespread mystical or paganly religious body. When Professor Angle became convinced that the sculptor was indeed ignorant of any cult or system of cryptic lore, he besieged his visitor with demands for future reports of dreams. This bore regular fruit, for after the first interview the manuscript records daily calls of the young man, during which he related startling fragments of nocturnal imagery whose burden was always some terrible cyclopean vista of dark and dripping stone with subterranean voices, or intelligence shouting monotonously in enigmatic sense impacts on indescribable savours gibberish. The two sounds most frequently repeated are those rendered by the letters Cthulhu and Relie. Let me have a drink. Are you guys enjoying? I'm glad you enjoy. Starting here. Hello, Fico. Hello, everyone. I love your dog, Ami. On March 23rd, the manuscript continued. Wilcox failed to appear, and inquiries at his quarter revealed that he had been stricken with an obscure sort of fever and taken to the home of his family in Waterman Street. He had cried out in the night, arousing several other artists in the building, and had manifested since then only alternations of the unconsciousness and delirium. My uncle at once telephoned the family, and from that time forward kept close watch of the case, calling often at the Fayers Street office of Dr. Turby, whom he learned to be in charge. The youth's febrile mind apparently was dwelling on strange things, and the doctor shuddered now and then as he spoke of them. They included not only repetition of what he had formerly dreamed, but touched wildly on a gigantic thing miles high, which walked or lumbered about. He had no time fully describe the subject, but occasional frantic words, as repeated by Dr. Toby, convinced the professor that it must be identical with the nameless monstrosity he had sought to depict in his dream sculpture. Reference to the object, the doctor added, was invariably a prelude to the young man's subsidence into lethargy. His temperature, oddly enough, was not greatly above normal, but his whole condition was otherwise such as to suggest true fever rather than mental disorder. On April 2nd, at about 3 p.m., every trace of Wilcox's malady suddenly ceased. He sat upright in bed, astonished to find himself at home and completely ignorant of what had happened in dream or reality since the night of March 22nd. Pronounced well by his physician, he returned to his quarters in 3 days, but to Professor Angle he was of no further assistance. All traces of strange dreaming had vanished with his recovery, and my uncle kept no record of his night thoughts after a week of pointless and irrelevant accounts of thoroughly usual visions. Here the first part of the manuscript ended, but references to certain of the scattered notes gave me much material for thought, so much in fact that only the ingrained skepticism then forming my philosophy can account for my continued distrust of the artist. The notes in question were those descriptive of the dreams of various persons covering the same period as that in which young Wilcox had had his strange visitations. My uncle, it seemed, had quickly instituted a prodigiously far-flung body of inquiries amongst nearly all friends whom he could question about without impertinence, asking for nightly reports of their dreams and the dates of any notable visions from some time past. The reception of his request seems to have been varied, but he must at the very least have received more responses than any ordinary man could have handled without a secretary. This original correspondence was not preserved, but his notes formed a thorough and really significant digest. Average people in society and business, and New England's traditional salt of the earth gave an almost completely negative response, though scattered cases of uneasy but formless nocturnal impressions appear here and there, always between March 23rd and April 2nd, the period of young Wilcox's delirium. Scientific men were little more affected, though. 4 cases of vague descriptions suggest fugitive glimpses of strange landscapes, and in one case there is mentioned a dread of something abnormal. It was from the artists and poets that the pertinent answers came, and I know that panic would have broken loose had they been able to compare notes, as it was lacking their original letters. I half suspected the compiler of having asked leading questions, or of having edited the correspondence in corroboration of what had latently resolved to see. That is why I continued to feel that Wilcox, somehow cognizant of the old data my uncle had possessed, had been imposing on the veteran scientist. These responses from aesthetes told a disturbing tale. From February 28th to April 2nd, a large proportion of them dreamed of bizarre things, the intensity of the dreams being immeasurable, the stronger during the period of the sculptor's delirium. Over a fourth of those who reported anything reported scenes and half sounds not unlike those which Wilcox had described, and some of the dreamers confessed acute fear of the gigantic nameless thing visible toward the last. One case which the note describes with emphasis was very sad. The subject, a widely known architect with leaning towards theosophy and occultism, went violently insane on the date of young Wilcox's seizure, and expired several months later after incessant screaming to be saved from some escaped denizen of hell. Had my uncle referred to these cases by the name of, instead of merely by number, I should have attempted some corroboration in personal investigation, but as it was, I succeeded in tracing down only a few. All of these, however, bore out the notes in full. I have often wondered if all the objects of the professor's questioning felt as puzzled as it did this fraction. It is well that no explanation shall ever reach them. The pressing cuttings, as I have intimated, touched on cases of panic, mania, and eccentricity during the given period. Professor Angle must have employed a cutting bureau, for the number of extracts was tremendous and the sources scattered throughout the globe. Here was a nocturnal suicide in London, where a lone sleeper had leaped from a window after a shocking cry. Here, likewise, a rambling letter to the editor of a paper in South America, where a fanatic deduces a dire future from visions he has seen. A dispatch from California describes a theosophist colony as donning white robes en masse for some glorious fulfillment which never arrives, whilst items from India speak guardedly of a serious nature, unrest toward the end of March. Voodoo orgies multiply in Haiti and African outposts. Report ominous mutterings. American officers in the Philippines find certain tribes bothersome about this time, and New York policemen are mobbed by hysterical Levantines on the night of March 22nd to 23rd. The west of Ireland, too, is full of wild rumour and legendary, and a fantastic painter named Ardois Bonneau hangs a blasphemous dream landscape in the Paris Spring Salon of 1926. And so numerous are the recorded troubles in insane asylums that only a miracle can have stopped the medical fraternity from noting the strange parallelisms and drawing mystified conclusions. A weird bunch of cuttings all told, and I can at this date scarcely envisage the callous rationalism with which I set them aside. But I was then convinced that young Wilcox had known of the older matters mentioned by the professor. Alex Grey Winter, thank you very much for the tier 1 sub. Very much appreciated. Are you all doing well? Woof woof. Welcome everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you, John Fonbeck, for the 200 bits. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Are you all sitting comfortably? I'm going to grab a little bit of a drink. Hello, Gamer Spine. I'm happy to hear it, Toaster. Hello, Evie. Good to have you. Are you guys ready for chapter 2? Are you? All right. Remember everyone, if you wanna talk about the stream on Twitter, you can use the hashtag livedocking, and you can join our Discord server. What book are you reading? It says it in the title. Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft. The Tale of Inspector Lagrasse. The older matters which made the sculptor's dream and bas relief was so significant to my uncle formed the subject of the second half of this long document, a manuscript. Once before, it appears Professor Angle had seen the hellish outlines of the nameless monstrosity, puzzled over the unknown hieroglyphics, and heard the ominous syllables which can only be rendered as Kafol or. And all this in so stirring a horrible connection that it is small wonder he pursued young Wilcox with queries and demands of data. The early experience had come in 1908, 17 years before, when the American Archaeological Society had held its annual meeting in St. Louis. Professor Angle was befitted one of his authority and attainments, had had a prominent part in all the deliberations, and was one of the first to be approached by several outsiders who took advantage of the convocation to offer questions for correct answering and problems for expert solution. The chief of these outsiders, and in a short time the focus of interest for the entire meeting, was a commonplace-looking middle-aged man who had travelled all the way from New Orleans for certain special information unobtainable from any local source. His name was John Raymond Lagrasse, and he was by profession an inspector of police. With him he bore the subject of his visit, a grotesque, repulsive, and apparently very ancient stone statuette, whose origin he was at a loss to determine. It must not be fancied that Inspector Lagrasse had the least interest in archaeology. I'm sorry, I don't understand what's going on in chat. Is everything alright? His name was John Raymond Lagrasse, and it was he by profession an inspector of police. With him he bore the subject of his visit, a grotesque, repulsive, and apparently very ancient stone statuette whose origin he was at a loss to determine. It must not be fancied that Inspector Lagrasse had the least interest in archaeology. On the contrary, his wish for enlightenment was prompted by purely professional considerations. The statuette, idol, fetish, or whatever it was, had been captured some months before in the wooded swamps south of New Orleans during a raid on a supposed voodoo meeting, and so singular and hideous were the rites connected with it, that the police could not but realize that he had stumbled on a dark cult totally unknown to them, and infinitely more diabolic than even the blackest of the African voodoo circles. Of its origin, apart from the erratic and unbelievable tales extorted from the captured members, absolutely nothing was to be discovered. Hence the anxiety of the police for any antiquarian lore which might help them to place the frightful symbol, and through it track down the cult to its fountainhead. Inspector Lagrasse was scarcely prepared for the sensation which his offering created. One sight of the thing had been enough to throw the assembled men of science into a state of tense excitement, and they lost no time in crowding around him to gaze at the diminutive figure whose utter strangeness and air of genuinely abysmal antiquity hinted so potently at unopened and archaic vistas. No recognized school of sculpture had animated this terrible object, yet centuries and even thousands of years seemed recorded in its dim, greenish surface of unplaceable stone. The figure, which was finally passed slowly from man to man for close and careful study, was between 7 and 8 inches in height, and of exquisitely artistic workmanship. It represented a monster of vaguely anthropoid outline, but with an octopus-like head, whose face was a mass of feelers, a scaly, rubbery-looking body, prodigious claws on hind and fore feet, and long, narrow wings behind. This thing, which seemed instinct with a fearsome and unnatural malignancy, was of a somewhat bloated corpulence, and squatted evilly on a rectangular block or pedestal covered with undecipherable characters. The tips of the wings touched the black edge of the block. the seat of the occupied centre, whilst the long curved claws of the doubled-up, crouching hind legs gripped the front edge and extended a quarter of the way down toward the bottom of the pedestal. The cephalopod head was bent forwards so that the ends of the facial feelers brushed the backs of huge forepaws, which clasped the croucher's elevated knees. The aspect of the whole was abnormally lifelike, and the more subtly fearful because of its source was totally unknown. Its vast and awesome and incalculable age was unmistakable, yet not one link did it shew with any known type of art belonging to civilization's youth, or indeed any other time. Totally separate, its very material was of a mystery, for the soapy greenish black stone with its golden iridescent flecks and striations resembled nothing familiar to geology or mineralogy. The characters along the base were equally baffling, and no member present, despite a representation of half the world's expert learning in this field, could form the least notion of even their remotest linguistic kinship. They, like the subject and material, belonged to something horribly remote and distinct from mankind as we know it. Something frightfully suggestive of old and unhallowed cycles of life in which our world and our conception had no part. And yet, hello Cavix, and yet, as the members severally shook their heads and confessed defeat at the inspector's problem, there was one man in the gathering who suspected a touch of bizarre familiarity in the monstrous shape and writing, who presently told us, with some diffidence, of the odd trifle he knew. This person was the late William Channing Webb, professor of anthropology in Princeton University, and an explorer of no slight note. Professor Webb had been engaged 48 years before in a tour of Greenland and Iceland in search of some runic inscriptions which he failed to unearth, and whilst high up on the West Greenland coast had encountered a singular tribe or cult of degenerate Eskimo whose religion, a curious form of devil worship, chilled him with its deliberate bloodthirstiness and repulsiveness. It was a faith of which other Eskimo knew little, and which they mentioned only with shudders, saying that it had come down from horribly ancient eons before ever the world was made. Besides nameless rites and human sacrifices, there were certain queer hereditary rituals addressed to a supreme elder devil or Tonasuk. And of this, Professor Webb had taken a careful phonetic copy from an aged Angekok, or wizard priest, expressing the sounds in Roman letters as best he knew how. But just now prime significance was the fetish which this cult had cherished, and around which they danced when the aurora leaped high over the ice cliffs. It was, the professor stated, a very crude bas-relief of stone. Thank you, Sparkstar, for the raid. A very crude bas-relief of stone, comprising a hideous picture and some cryptic writing, and so far as he could tell, it was a rough parallel in all essential features of the bestial thing now lying before the meeting. This data, received with suspense and astonishment by the assembled members, proved doubly exciting to Inspector Lagrasse, and he began at once to ply his informant with questions. Having noted and copied an oral ritual before the swamp cult worshippers his men had arrested, he besought the professor to remember as best he might the syllables taken down amongst the diabolist Eskimo, There then followed an exhaustive comparison of detail, and a moment of really awed silence when both detective and scientist agreed on the virtual identity of the phrase common to two hellish rituals so many worlds apart. What, in substance, both the Esquimalt wizards and the Louisiana swamp priests had chanted to their kindred idols was something very like this, the word divisions being guessed at from the traditional breaks in the phrase as chanted aloud. Here we go. Relihen. Lagrasse had 1 point in advance of Professor Weber, for several among his mongrel prisoners had repeated to him what older celebrants had told him the words meant. This text as given ran something like this. In his house at Relier, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. And now, in response to a general and urgent demand, Inspector Lagrasse related as fully as possible his experience with the swamp worshippers, telling a story to which I could see my uncle attached profound significance. It savoured of the wildest dreams of myth-makers and theosophists, and disclosed an astonishing degree of cosmic imagination among such half-castles and pariahs as might be least expected to possess it. On November 1st, 1907, there had come to the New Orleans police a frantic summons from the swamp and lagoon country to the south. The squatters there, mostly primitive but good-natured descendants of the Lafitte men, were in the grip of stark terror from an unknown thing which had stolen upon them in the night. It was voodoo, apparently, but voodoo of a more terrible sort that they had ever known, and some of their women and children had disappeared since the malevolent tom-tom had begun its incessant beating far within the black-haunted woods, where no dweller ventured. There were insane shouts and harrowing screams, soul-chilling chants, and dancing devil flames, and the frightened messenger added, the people could stand it no more. So a body of 20 police, filling 2 carriages and an automobile, had set out in the late afternoon with the shivering squatter as guide. At the end of the passable road they alighted, and for miles splashed on in silence through the terrible cypress woods where day never came, ugly roots and malignant hanging nooses of Spanish moss beset them, and now and then a pile of dank stones or a fragment of rotting wall intensified by its hint of morbid habitation or depression which every malformed tree and every fungus islet combined to create. At length the squatter settlement, a miserable huddle of huts, hove in sight, and hysterical dwellers ran out to cluster around the group of bobbing lanterns. The muffled beat of tom-toms was now faintly audible far, far ahead, and a curdling shriek came at infrequent intervals when the wind shifted. A reddish glare, too, seemed to filter through the pale undergrowth beyond the avenues of forest at night. Reluctant even to be left alone again, each one of the cowed squatters refused point blank to advance another inch toward the scene of unholy worship. So Inspector Lagrasse and his 19 colleagues plunged on unguided into black arcades of horror that none of them had ever trod before. The region now entered by the police was one of traditionally evil repute, substantially unknown and untraversed by white men. I don't know why this detail needs to be here, but okay. There were legends of hidden lake, unglimpsed by mortal sight, in which dwelt a huge, formless, white polypus, things with luminous eyes, and squatters whispered that bat-winged devils flew up out of the caverns in inner earth to worship it at midnight. They said it had been there before D'Iberville, before La Salle, before the Indians, and even before the wholesome beasts and birds of the woods. It was nightmare itself, and to see it was to die, but it made men dream, and so they knew enough to keep away. The present voodoo orgy was indeed on the merest fringe of this abhorrent area, but that location was bad enough. Hence, perhaps, the very place of worship had terrified the squatters more than the shocking sounds and incidents. Only poetry or madness could do justice to the noises heard by Lagrasse's men as they ploughed on through the black morass toward the red glare and the muffled tom-toms. There are vocal qualities peculiar to men and vocal qualities peculiar to beasts, and it is terrible to hear the one when the sound should yield to other. Animal fury and orgiastic license here whipped themselves to demonic heights by howls and squawking ecstasies that tore the reverberated through those nighted woods like pestilential tempests from the gulfs of hell. Now and then the less organized ululations would cease, and from what seemed the well-drilled chorus of hoarse voices would rise and sing-song chant that hideous phrase or ritual. And then the men, having reached the spot where the trees were thinner, came suddenly in sight of the spectacle itself. 4 of them reeled, 1 fainted, and the 2 were shaken into a frantic cry which the mad cacophony of the orgy fortunately deadened. Lagrasse dashed swamp water on the face of the fainting man, and all stood trembling and nearly hypnotized with horror. In a natural glade of the swamp stood a grassy island of perhaps an acre's extent, clear of trees and tolerably dry. On this now leaped and twisted a more indescribable horde of human abnormality than any but a Siam or Angarola could paint. Void of clothing, this hybrid spawn were braying, bellowing and writhing about a monstrous ring-shaped bonfire, in the centre of which, revealed by occasional rifts in the curtain of flame, stood a great granite monolith, some 8 feet in height, on top of which, incongruous with its diminutiveness, rested the noxious carven statuette. From a wide circle of 10 scaffolds set up at regular intervals with the flame-girth monolith as a centre hung head downward, the oddly marred bodies of the helpless squatters who had disappeared. It was inside the circle that the ring worshippers jumped and roared, the general direction of the Mars motion, beings from left to right in the endless bacchanal between the ring of bodies and the ring of fire. It may have been only imagination, and it may have been only echoes which induced one of the men, an excitable Spaniard, to fancy he heard antiphonal responses from the ritual to the ritual from so far, and unillumined spot deeper from within the woods of ancient legendary horror. This man, Joseph D. Galvez, I later met and questioned, and he proved distractingly imaginative. He indeed went so far as to hint of the faint beatings of great wings and of a glimpse of shining eyes and a monstrous white bulk beyond the remotest trees. But I supposed he had been hearing too much native superstition. Actually, the horrified pause of the men was of comparatively brief duration. Duty came first, and although there must have been nearly 100 mongrel celebrants in the throng, the police relied on their firearms and plunged determinedly into the nauseous rout. For 5 minutes the resultant din and chaos were beyond description. Wild blows were struck, shots were fired, and escapes were made, but in the end Lagrasse was able to count some 47 sullen prisoners, whom he forced to dress in haste and fall into line between 2 rows of policemen. 5 of the worshippers lay dead. 2 severely wounded ones were carried on improvised stretchers by their fellow prisoners. The image on the monolith, of course, was carefully removed and carried back by Lagrasse. Examined at headquarters, after a trip of intense strain and weariness, the prisoners all proved to be men of a very low, mixed-blooded and mentally aberrant type. Most were seamen, and a sprinkling of N-words and M-words. God damn it, Lovecraft. Largely West Indians, brava Portuguese from the Cape Verde Islands gave a colouring of voodooisms to the heterogeneous cult. Hello, Wang Wang, thank you for the 100 bits, darling. Thank you very much. But before many questions were asked, it became manifest that something far deeper and older than N-word fetishism was involved. Degraded and ignorant as they were, the creatures held with surprising consistency to the central idea of their loathsome faith. God damn it, Lovecraft. Sorry, everyone. They worshipped, so they said, the great old ones who lived ages before there were any men, and who came to the young world out of the sky. Those old ones were gone now, inside the earth and under the sea, but their dead bodies had told their secrets in dreams to the first men, who formed a cult which had never died. This was the cult. This was that cult, and the prisoners said it had always existed, and would always exist, hidden in distant wastes and dark places all over the world until the time when the great priest Cthulhu, from his dark house in the mighty city of Relier under the waters, should rise and bring the earth again beneath his sway. Some day he would call, when the stars were ready, and the secret cult would always be waiting to liberate him. Meanwhile, no more must be told. There was a secret which even torture could not extract. Mankind was not absolutely alone among the conscious things of earth, for shapes came out of the dark to visit the faithful few. But these were not the great old ones, no. No man had ever seen the old ones. The carven idol was great Cthulhu, but none might say whether or not the others were precisely like him. One could read the old writing now, but things were told only by word of mouth. The chanted ritual was not the secret. That was never spoken aloud, only whispered. The chant meant only this. In his house at Relier, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. Only 2 of the prisoners were found sane enough to be hanged, and the rest were committed to various institutions. All denied part in ritual murders, and averred that the killing had been done by black-winged ones, which had come to them from their immemorial meeting place in the haunted wood. But of those mysterious allies no coherent account could ever be gained. What the police did extract came mainly from an immensely aged mestizo named Castro, who claimed to have sailed to strange port and talked to undying leaders of the cult in the mountains of China. Old Castro remembered bits of hideous legend that paled the speculations and theosophists, and made man and the world seem recent and transient indeed. There had been eons when other things ruled on the earth, and they had great cities. Remains of them, he said, the deathless Chinese people had told him, were still to be found as cyclopean stones on islands in the Pacific. They all died vast epochs of time before men came, but there were arts which could revive them when the stars had come round again to the right positions in the cycle of eternity. They had indeed come themselves from the stars and brought their images with them, these great old ones. Castro continued, were not composed altogether of flesh and blood. They had shape, for did not this star-fashioned image prove it? But that shape was not made of matter. When the stars were right, they could plunge from world to world through the sky. But when the stars were wrong, they could not live. But although they no longer lived, they would never really die. They all lay in stone houses in their great city of Relier, preserved by the spells of mighty Cthulhu for a glorious resurrections when the stars and the earth might once more be ready for them. But at that time some force from outside must serve to liberate their bodies. The spells that preserved them intact likewise prevented them from making an initial move, and they could only lie awake in the dark and think, whilst uncounted millions of years rolled by. They knew all that was occurring in the universe, but their mode of speech was transmitted thought. Even now they talked in their tombs, when after infinities of chaos the first men came. The great old ones spoke to the sensitive amongst them by moulding their dreams, for only thus could their language reach the fleshly minds of mammals. Then, whispered Castro, those first men formed the cults around small idols, which the great ones shewed them. Idols brought in Demarius from dark stars. That cult would never die till the stars came right again, and the secret priests would take Cthulhu from his tomb to revive his subjects and resume his rule of earth. The time would be easy to know, for then mankind would have become as the great old ones, free and wild, and beyond good and evil, with laws and morals thrown aside, and all men shouting and killing and reveling in joy. Then the liberated old ones would teach them ways to shout and kill and revel and enjoy themselves, and all the earth would flame with a holocaust of ecstasy and freedom. Meanwhile the cult, by appropriate rites, must keep alive the memory of those ancient ways, and shadow forth the prophecy of their return. In the elder time, chosen men had talked with the entombed old ones in dreams, but then something had happened. The great stone city, Villiers, with its monoliths and sepulchres, had sunk beneath the waves and the deep waters, full of the one primal mystery through which not even thought can pass, had cut off the spectral intercourse, but memory never died, and high priests said that the city would rise again when the stars were right. Then came out of the earth the black spirits of earth, mouldy and shadowy and full of dim rumors, picked up in caverns beneath forgotten sea bottoms. But of them Castro dared not speak much. He cut himself off hurriedly, and no amount of persuasion or subtlety could elicit more in this direction. The size of the old ones, too, he curiously declined to mention. Of the cult, he said that the center lay amid the pathless deserts of Arabia, where Edom, the city of pillars, dreams hidden and untouched. It was not allied to the European witch cult, and was virtually unknown beyond its members. No book had ever really hinted of it, though the deathless Chinese people said that there were double meanings in the Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hasred, which the initiated might read as they chose, especially the much discussed Kool-Aid. That is not death which can eternal lie, and with strange eons, even death may die. Lagrasse, deeply impressed and not a little bewildered, had inquired in vain concerning the historic affiliations of the cult. Castro apparently had told the truth when he said that it was wholly secret. The authorities at Tulane University could shed no light upon either cult or image, and now the detective had come to the highest authorities in the country and met with no more than the Greenland tale of Professor Webb. The feverish interest aroused at the meeting by Lagrasse's tale, corroborated as it was by the statuette, is echoed in the subsequent correspondence of those who attended. Although scant mentions occurs in the formal publications of the Society, caution is the first care of those accustomed to face occasional charlatanry and imposture. Lagrasse for some time lent the image to Professor Webb, but at the latter's death it was returned to him and remains in his possession, where I viewed it not long ago. It is truly a terrible thing, and unmistakably akin to the dream sculpture of young Wilcox. That my uncle was excited by the tale of the sculpture, I did not wonder, for what thoughts must arise upon hearing after a knowledge of what Lagrasse had learned of the cult, of a sensitive young man who dreamed not only the figure and exact hieroglyphics of the swamp-found image and the Greenland devil tablet, but had come in his dreams upon at least 3 of the precise words of the formula, uttered alike by Eskimo diabolists and mongrel Louisianans. Professor Engel's instant start on an investigation of the utmost thoroughness was eminently natural, though privately I suspected young Wilcox of having heard of the cult in some indirect way, and of having invented a series of dreams to heighten and continue the mystery at my uncle's expense. The dream narratives and cuttings collected by the professor were, of course, strong corroboration, but the rationalism of my mind and the extravagance of the whole subject led me to adopt what I thought was the most sensible conclusions. So after thoroughly studying the manuscript again and correlating the theosophical and anthropological notes with the cult narrative of Lagrasse, I made a trip to Providence to see the sculptor and give him rebuke. I thought proper for boldly imposing upon a learned and aged man. Wilcox still lived alone in the fleur-de-lis building in Thomas Street, a hideous Victorian imitation of 17th century Breton architecture, which flaunts its stuccoed front amidst the lovely colonial houses on the ancient hill, and under the very shadow of the finest Georgian steeple in America. I found him at work in his rooms, and once he conceded from the specimens scattered about that his genius is indeed profound and authentic. He will, I believe, sometime be heard from as one of the great decadents, for he has crystallized in clay, and will one day mirror in marble those nightmares and fantasies which Arthur Machen evokes in prose, and Clark Ashton Smith makes visible in verse and in painting. Dark, frail, and somewhat unkempt in aspect, he turned languidly at my knock, and asked me my business without rising. When I told him who I was, he displayed some interest, for my uncle had excited his curiosity in probing his strange dreams, yet had never explained the reason for his study. I did not enlarge his knowledge in this regard, but sought with some subtlety to draw him out. In a short time I became convinced of his absolute sincerity, for he spoke of the dreams in a manner none could mistake. They and their subconscious residue had influenced his art profoundly, and he showed me a morbid statue whose contours almost made me shake with potency of its black suggestion. He could not recall having seen the original of this thing except in his own dream bas-relief, but the outlines had formed themselves ostensibly under his hands. It was no doubt the giant shape he had raved of in delirium, that he really knew nothing of the hidden cult save from what my uncle's relentless catechism had let fall. He soon made clear, and again I strove to think of some way in which he could possibly have received the weird impressions. Everyone in chat, please say happy birthday to Suziga. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Suziga. He talked of his dreams in a strangely poetic fashion, making me see with terrible vividness the damp cyclopean city of slimy greenstone whose geometry, he oddly said, was all wrong, and hear with frightened expectancy the ceaseless, half-mental calling from underground. Cthulhu Cthulhu. These words had formed part of the dread ritual which told of dead Cthulhu's dream vigil in his stone vault at Vrelier, and I felt deeply moved despite my rational beliefs. Wilcox, I was sure, had heard of the cult in some casual way, and had soon forgotten it, amidst the mass of his equally weird readings and imagining. Later, by virtue of its sheer impressiveness, it had found subconscious expression in dreams, in the bas-relief and in the terrible statue I now beheld, so that his imposture upon my uncle had been a very innocent one. The youth was of a type at once slightly affected and slightly ill-mannered, which I could never like, but I was willing enough now to admit both his genius and his honesty. I took leave of him amicably, and wished him all the success of his and wished him all the success his talent promises. The matter of the cult remained to fascinate me, and at times I had visions of personal fame from researches into its origin and connections. I visited New Orleans, talked with Lagrasse and others of that old-time raiding party, saw the frightful imagery, and even questioned such of the mongrel prisoners as still survived. Old Castro, unfortunately, had been dead for some years. What I now heard so graphically firsthand, though, it was really no more than a detailed confirmation of what my uncle had written, excited me afresh, for I felt sure that I was on the track of a very real, very secret, and very ancient religion whose discovery would make me an anthropologist of note. My attitude was still one of absolute materialism, as I still wish it were, and I discounted with almost inexplicable perversity of the coincidence of the dream notes and odd cuttings collected by Professor Angel. One thing I began to suspect, which I now fear and know, is that my uncle's death was far from natural. He fell on a narrow hill street, leading up from an ancient waterfront swarming with foreign mongrels, after a careless push from an N-word sailor. God damn it, Lovecraft. I did not forget the mixed blood and marine pursuits of the cult members in Louisiana, and would not be surprised to learn of secret methods and poison needles as ruthless and as anciently known as the cryptic rites and beliefs. Lagrasse and his men, it is true, have been let alone, but in Norway a certain seaman who saw things is dead. Might not the deeper inquiries of my uncle, after encountering the sculpture's data, have come to sinister years? I think Professor Angel died because he knew too much, or because he was likely to learn too much. Whether I shall go as he did remains to be seen, for I have learned much now. Hello, Mitchell. Thank you for the 100 bits. And that's it for chapter 2. Gonna keep reading soon. Just taking a brief break from my voice. Can you summarize everything so far? Sure. So the summary of the story so far is that the main character had a grand uncle who died. An uncle who was an esteemed professor, history professor who studied ancient civilizations. And he found that between February 27th and the 2nd of March, a lot of people all over the world dreamed of this weird thing. A city under the sea, with a great big monster with an octopus head. And he set out to investigate it. And apparently this uncle who had died, he interviewed people like a certain individual, Lagrasse, who performed a raid in the South States of America, where people were worshipping this deity. Apparently people all over the world were worshipping this deity, who it was said was sleeping dead beneath the ocean and waiting to waken up when the stars align in the right way. The main character wants to earn money from the story, but little by little as he investigates, it turns out to be more true. Yes. We are reaching the final 3rd chapter, so I will now have a little bit of a drink. If it isn't my favorite dog boy, Mary, how are you? I'm splendid. I'm doing okay. drinking game. Have a sip of beverage of choice every time you hear Mary say, "God damn it, Lovecraft." Frankly, I forgot there were N words in this. I'm sorry, everyone. I guess I just blocked them out when I was reading it last time. I choose not to say it, out of respect. Although you can read it on the page if you want to. Drink up, Mary, stay hydrated. Thank you. Do you guys like the story so far? I think it's a brilliantly written story. Thank you. Thank you very much. We are now reaching the finale of this story. Hello, Kaya. I made a brief recap of the story a moment ago. Yes, Doggo, it's great. You read horror very well, thank you. For some of the scenes, I actually had tears falling down my eyes, not out of sadness, but more out of intensity. Some of the descriptions are very, very, dark. It's very intense, and I'm an emotional man. Your voice is both soothing and terrifying. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's very intriguing. Thank you, Nijimura. Thank you. I'm going to respond to a DM real quick. Frederick. I need to message Frederick Etheria. I have a theory, but it's a little bit offensive. It's because there's another person who lives in Providence, New England, who is very controversial, in the same way Lovecraft is. Although they are very different. My theory was that both H.P. Lovecraft and this other person, who I won't say the name of, that they are both corrupted by an ancient being that sleeps beneath Providence. Because Lovecraft lived in Providence, Rhode Island. Yes. I think Frederick's sleeping, but I hope he will like my theory. It's a bit of a humorous theory, though. I think it would be funny if it was true. Not a bad theory. Thank you. Yes. It's because there's another person who lives there now, a content creator who's very infamous, who lives in Providence, New England, Rhode Island, and is Rhode Island New England? I don't remember. There's another content creator who's quite racist, who makes a lot of racist jokes, and Lovecraft also lived in Providence, Rhode Island, so my theory is that they're both corrupted by the same dark being that sleeps beneath the ocean in near Rhode Island. Yes. Stupid, I know. Also, fun fact, Rhode Island is not an island. Oh yeah, Rhode Island is definitely cursed. Yes. Anyway. I like the theory, thank you. Something is important. I don't know. Anyway, are you guys ready for more story? Are you? I like your theory, thank you. Sure, darling. Maybe there was an island off the coast of Rhode Island. Maybe that's where the Dark One sleeps. Anyway. No one knows why it's called Rhode Island, by the way. It's also the place where this story is set. No one actually knows why it's called Rhode Island. No one knows. It's kind of mysterious. It's definitely something dark slumbering off the coast of Rhode Island. 100%. Something dark and sinister beneath those waves. Woof, woof, woof. Okay. You all ready? Let's do it. The Madness from the Sea. Chapter 3. The Madness from the Sea. If heaven ever wished to grant me a boon, it will be a total effacing of the results of a mere chance which fixed my eye on a certain stray piece of shelf paper. It was nothing on which I would naturally have stumbled in the course of my daily round, for it was an old number of an Australian journal, the Sydney Bulletin for April 18th, 1925. It had escaped even the Cutting Bureau, which had at the time of its issuance been avidly collecting material for my uncle's research. I had largely given over my inquiries into what Professor Angell had called the Cthulhu cult, and was visiting a learned friend in Paterson, New Jersey, the curator of a local museum and a mineralogist of note. Examining one day the reserve specimens roughly set on storage in a rear room of the museum, my eye was caught by an odd picture in one of the old papers spread beneath the stones. It was the Sydney Bulletin I have mentioned, for my friend has wide affiliations in all conceivable foreign parts, and the picture was a half-tone cut of a hideous stone image almost identical with that which Lagrasse had found in the swamp. Eagerly clearing the sheet of its precious contents, I scanned the item in detail, and was disappointed to find it of only moderate length. What it suggested, however, was a portentous significance to my flagging quest, and I carefully tore it out for immediate action. It read as follows: Mystery derelict found at sea. Vigilant arrives with helpless armed New Zealand yacht in tow. One survivor and dead man found aboard. Tale of desperate battle and deaths at sea. Rescued seaman refuses. Particulars of strange experience. Odd idol found in his possession. Inquiry to follow. The Morrison Company's freighter, Vigilant, bound for Valparaiso, arrived this morning at its wharf in Darling Harbour. Having in tow the battered and disabled but heavily armed steam yacht Alert of Dunedin, New Zealand, which was sighted April 12th in south latitude 34 degrees 21 with longitude 152 degrees 17, with one living and one dead man aboard. The Vigilant left Valparaiso March 25th, and on April 2nd was driven considerably south of her course by exceptionally heavy storms and monster waves. On April 12th, the derelict was sighted, and though apparently deserted, was found upon boarding to contain one survivor in a half-delirious condition, and one man who had evidently been dead for more than a week. The living man was clutching a horrible stone idol of unknown origin, about a foot in height, regarding whose nature authorities at Sydney University the Royal Society and even the museum in College Street all profess complete bafflement, in which the survivor says he found in the cabin of the yacht, in a small carved shrine of common pattern. This man, after discovering his senses, was told an exceedingly strange story of piracy and slaughter. His name is Gustav Johansen, a Norwegian of some intelligence, and had been second mate of the two-masted schooner Emma of Auckland, which sailed for Callao February 20th with a complement of 11 men. The Emma, he says, was delayed and thrown widely south, of course, by the great storm of March 1st, and on March 22nd, in south latitude 49 degrees 51st, west longitude 128 degrees 34, encountered the Alert, manned by a queer and evil-looking crew of Kanakas and half-castes. Being ordered peremptorily to turn back, Captain Collins refused, whereupon the strange crew began to fire savagely, and without warning upon the schooner, with a peculiarly heavy battery of brass cannon forming part of the yacht's equipment. The Emma's men shoot, fight, says the survivor, and though the schooner began to sink from shots beneath the waterline, they managed to heave alongside their enemy and board her, grappling with the savage crew on the yacht's deck, and being forced to kill them all, the number of being slightly superior. Thank you very much, Celestial Starboy, for the 2 tier 1 subs. Thank you very much for the gift subs. The number being slightly superior because of their particular abhorrent and desperate, though rather clumsy, mode of fighting. 3 of the Emma's men, including Captain Collins and the first mate Green, were killed, and the remaining 8 under second mate Johansen proceeded to navigate the captured yacht, going ahead in their original direction to see if any reason for their ordering back then had existed. The next day it appears they raised and landed on a small island, although none is known to exist in that particular part of the ocean, and 6 of the men somehow died ashore, though Johansen is clearly reticent of this part of his story, and speaks only of their falling into a rock chasm. Later, it seems, he and one companion boarded the yacht and tried to manage her, but were beaten about by the storm of April 2nd. From that time till his rescue on the 12th, the man remembers little, and he does not even recall when William Bryden, his companion, died. Bryden's death reveals no apparent cause and was probably due to excitement or exposure. Cable advisors from Dunedin reported that the Alert was well known as an island trader and bore an evil reputation along the waterfront. It was owned by a curious group of half-castes whose frequent meetings and night trips to the woods attracted no little curiosity, and it had set sail in a great haste just after the storm and earth tremors of March 1st. Our Auckland correspondent gives the Emma and her crew an excellent reputation, and Johansen is described as a sober and worthy man. The Admiralty will institute an inquiry on the whole matter beginning tomorrow, at which every effort will be made to induce Johansen to speak more freely than he has done hitherto. Sorry? Is everyone okay? Starboy, thank you for the tier 2 tier 1 subs, thank you very much. Off. Okay, let's keep going. This was all, together with the picture of the hellish image, but what a train of ideas it started in my mind. Here were new treasuries of data on the Cthulhu cult, and evidence that it had strange interests at sea as well as on land. What motive prompted the hybrid crew to order back the Emma as they sailed about with their hideous idol? What was the unknown island on which the 6 of the Emma's crew had died, and about which the mate Johansen was so secretive? What had the Vice Admiralty's investigation brought out, and what was known of the noxious cult in Dunedin? And most marvellously of all, what deep and more than natural linkage of the dates was this which gave him a malign and now undeniable significance to the various turns of events so carefully noted by my uncle? March 1st, our February 28th according to the international dateline. The earthquake in March had come. From Dunedin, the Alert and her noisome crew had darted eagerly forth as if imperiously summoned, and on the other side of the earth poets and artists had begun to dream of a strange, dark, cyclopean city, whilst a young sculptor had moulded in his sleep the form of the dreaded Cthulhu. March 23rd. The crew of the Emma landed on an unknown island, and left 6 men dead, and on that date the dreams of sensitive men assumed a heightened vividness and darkened with dread of a giant monster's malign pursuit, whilst an architect had gone mad, and a sculptor had lapsed into sudden delirium. And what of the storm of April 2nd? The date on which all dreams of the dank city ceased, and Wilcox emerged unharmed from the bondage of strange fever. What of all this, and of those hints of old Castro about the sunken, star-born old ones and their coming reign? Their faithful cult and their mastery of dreams. Was I tottering on the brink of cosmic horrors, beyond man's power to bear? If so, they must be horrors of the mind alone, for in some way the 2nd of April had put a stop to whatever monstrous menace had begun its siege of mankind's soul. That evening, after a day of hurried cabling and arranging, I bade my host adieu, and took a train for San Francisco. In less than a month I was in Dunedin, where, however, I found that little was known of the strange cult members who had lingered in the old sea taverns. Waterfront scum was far too common for special mention, though there was vague talk about one inland trip these mongrels had made, during which faint drumming and red flame were noted on the distant hills. In Auckland, I learned that Johansen had returned with yellow hair turned white, after perfunctory and inconclusive questioning at Sydney, and I had therefore sold his cottage in West Street, and sailed with his wife to his old home in Oslo. Of his stirring experience he would tell his friends no more than he had told the Admiralty officials, and all they could do was to give me his Oslo address. After that I went to Sydney, and talked profitlessly with seamen and members of the Vice Admiralty Court. I saw the Alert, now sold and in commercial use at the Circular Quay in Sydney Cove, but gained nothing from its non-committal bulk. The crouching image with its cuttlefish head, dragon body, scaly wings, and hieroglyphed pedestal was preserved in the museum at Hyde Park, and I studied it long and well, finding it a thing of balefully exquisite workmanship, and with the same utter mystery, terrible antiquity, and unearthly strangeness of material which I had noted in Lagrasse's smaller specimen. Geologists the curator told me, had found it a monstrous puzzle, for they vowed that the world held no rock like it. Then I thought, with a shudder, what old Castro had told Lagrasse about the primal great ones. They had come from the stars, and had brought their images with them. Shaken with such mental revolution as I had never known before, I now resolved to visit Mate Johansen in Oslo. Sailing for London, I re-embarked at once for the Norwegian capital, and one autumn day landed at the trim wharves in the shadow of Egeberg. Johansen's address, I discovered, lay in the old town of King Harald Hardrada, which kept alive the name of Oslo during all the centuries that the greater city masqueraded as Christiania. I made the brief trip by taxicab and knocked with palpitant heart at the door of a neat and ancient building with plastered front. A sad-faced woman in black answered my summons, and I was stung with disappointment when she told me in halting English that Gustav Johansen was no more. He had not survived his return, said his wife, for the doings at sea in 1925 had broken him. He had told her no more than he had told the public, but had left a long manuscript of technical matters, as he said, written in English, evidently in order to safeguard her from the peril of casual carousal. During a walk through the narrow lane near the Gothenburg dock, a bundle of papers falling from an attic window had knocked him down. Two Lagrasse sailors at once helped him to his feet, but before the ambulance could reach him, he was dead. Physicians found no adequate cause for the end and laid it to heart trouble and a weakened constitution. I now felt gnawing at my vitals. The dark terror which will never leave me till I, too, am at rest, accidentally or otherwise. Persuading the widow that my connection with her husband's technical matters was sufficient to entitle me to his manuscript. I bore the document away and began to read it on the London boat. It was a simple, rambling thing, a naive sailor's effort at a post facto diary, and strove to recall day by day that last awful voyage. I cannot attempt to transcribe it verbatim in all its cloudiness and redundance, but I will tell its gist, enough to shew why the sound of the water against the vessel's side became so unendurable. To me that I stopped my ears with cotton. Johansen, thank God, did not know quite all, even though he saw the city in the thing. But I shall never sleep calmly again when I think of the horrors that lurk ceaselessly behind life in time and in space, and of those unhallowed blasphemies from elder stars which dream beneath the sea. Known and favoured by a nightmare cult, and eager to loose them on the world whenever another earthquake shall heave their monstrous stone city again to the sun and air. Johansen's voyage had begun just as he told it to the Vice Admiralty. The Emma, in ballast, had cleared Auckland on February 20th, and had felt the full force of that earthquake-born tempest which must have heaved up from the sea bottoms the horrors that filled men's dreams. Once more under control, the ship was making good progress when held up by the Alert on March 22nd, and I could feel the mate's regret as he wrote of her bombardment and sinking, the swarthy cult fiends, and on the Alert he speaks with significant horror. There was some peculiarly abominable quality about them, which made their destruction seem almost a duty, and Johansen shews ingenious wonder at the charge of ruthlessness brought against his party during the proceedings of the Court of Inquiry, then driven ahead by curiosity in their captured yacht under Johansen's command. The men sight a great stone pillar sticking out of the sea in south latitude 47 degrees 9, west longitude 126 degrees 43, come upon a coastline of mingled mud, ooze, and weedy cyclopean masonry. Thank you, Afotenti, Afotahi, for the tier 1 sub to Fallen Syndicate. Thank you very much. Thank you, darling. Really appreciate it. Come upon a coastline of mingled mud, ooze, and cyclopean masonry, which can be nothing less than the tangible substance of Earth's supreme terror, the nightmare corpse city of Relier, that was built in measureless eons behind history by the vast loathsome shapes that seeped down from the dark stars. There lay great Cthulhu and his hordes, hidden in green slimy vaults, and sending out at last after cycles incalculable the thoughts that spread fear to dreams of the sensitive and called imperiously to the faithful to come on pilgrimage of liberation and restoration. All this Johansen did not suspect, but God knows he soon saw enough. I suppose that only a single mountain top, the hideous monolith-crowned citadel whereon great Cthulhu was buried, actually emerged from the waters. When I think of the extent of all that may be brooding down there, I almost wish to kill myself forthwith. Johansen and his men were awed by the cosmic majesty of this dripping Babylon of elder demons, and must have guessed without guidance that it was nothing of this, or of any sane planet. Thank you for the raid. We're reading Call of Cthulhu. Welcome, Blue Bite Sora. Ladies and gentlemen, please go check out Blue Bite Sora. Can I get a big shout out? Thank you. Awe at the unbelievable size of the greenish stone blocks, at the dizzying height of the great carven monolith, and at the stupefying identity of the colossal statues and bas-reliefs, with the queer image found in the shrine on the alert, is poignantly visible in every line of the mate's frightened description. Without knowing what futurism is like, Johansen achieved something very close to it when he spoke of the city, for instead of describing any definitive structure or building, he dwells only on broad impression of vast angles and stone surfaces too great to belong to any thing right or proper for this earth, and impious with horrible images and hieroglyphs. I mention his talk about angles because it suggests something Wilcox had told me of his awful dream. He had said that the geometry of the dream place he saw was abnormal, non-Euclidean, and loathsomely redundant of his spheres and dimensions apart from ours. Now an unlettered seaman felt the same thing whilst gazing at the terrible reality. Johansen and his men landed at a sloping mudbank on this monstrous acropolis, and clambered slipperily up over titan oozy blocks which could have been no mortal staircase. The very sun of heaven seemed distorted when viewed through the polarizing miasma welling out from this sea-soaked perversion, and twisted menace and suspense lurked leeringly in those crazily delusive angles of carven rocks, where a second glance shewed concavity after the first shewed convexity. Something very like fright had come over all the explorers, before anything more definite than rock and ooze and weed was seen. Each would have fled had he not feared the scorn of the others, and it was only half-heartedly that they searched, vainly, as it proved, for some portable souvenir to bear it away. It was Rodriguez the Portuguese who climbed up the foot of the monolith and shouted of what he had found. The rest followed him, and looked curiously at the immense carved door with the now familiar squid-dragon bas-relief. It was, Johansen said, like a great barn door, and they all felt that it was a door because of the ornate lintel, threshold, and jambs around it, though they could not decide whether it lay like a trap door or slant, otherwise like an outside cellar door. As Wilcox would have said, this geometry of the place was all wrong. One could not be sure that the sea and the ground were horizontal, hence the relative position of everything else seemed phantasmally variable. Bryden pushed at the stone in several places without result. Then Donovan felt over it delicately around the edge, pressing each point separately as he went. He climbed interminably along the grotesque stone moulding. That is, one would call it climbing if the thing was not after all horizontal. And the men wondered how any door in the universe could be so vast. Then, very softly and slowly, the acre-great panel began to give inward at the top, and they saw that it was balanced. Donovan slid, or somehow propelled himself down along the jamb, and rejoined his fellows. And everyone watched the queer recession of the monstrously carven portal. In this fantasy of prismatic distortion, it moved anomalously in a diagonal way, so that all the rules of matter and perspective seemed upset. The aperture was black, with a darkness almost material. The tenebrousness was indeed a positive quality, for it obscured such parts of the inner walls as ought to have been revealed, and actively burst forth like smoke from its eon-long imprisonment, visibly darkening the sun as it slunk away into the shrunken and gibbous sky on flapping membranous wings. The odour rising from the newly opened depths was intolerable, and at length the quick-eared Hawkins thought he heard a nasty, slopping sound down there. Everyone listened, and everyone was listening still, when it lumbered slopperingly into sight, and gropingly squeezed its gelatinous green immensity through the black doorway into the tainted outside of that poison city of madness. Poor Johansen's handwriting almost gave out when he wrote this. Of the 6 men who never reached the ship, he thinks 2 perished of pure fright in that accursed instant. The thing cannot be described. There is no language for it, such abysms of shrieking and immemorial lunacy, such eldritch contradictions of all matter and force and cosmic order. A mountain walked or stumbled. God! What wonder that across the great earth of great architect went mad, and poor Wilcox raved with fever in that telepathic instant. The thing of the idols, the green sticky spawn of the stars, had awakened to claim his own. The stars were right again. And what an age-old cult had failed to do by design, a band of innocent sailors had done by accident. And vigintillions of years, great Cthulhu was loose again, and ravening for delight. Free men were swept under. Free men were swept up by the flappy claws. Before anybody turned, God rest them, if there be any rest in this universe. They were Donovan, Guerrera, and Ångström. Parker slipped as the other three were plungingly frenziedly over endless vistas of green-crusted rock to the boat, and Johansen swears he was swallowed up by an angle of masonry which shouldn't have been there. An angle which was acute but behaved as if it were obtuse. So only Bryden and Johansen reached the boat and pulled desperately for their alert as the mountainous monstrosity flopped down the slimy stones and hesitated flounderingly at the edge of the water. Steam had not been suffered to go down entirely. Despite the departures of all hands for the shore, and it was the work of only a few moments of feverish rushing up and down between the wheels and engines to get the Alert underway. Slowly, amidst the distorted horrors of that indescribable scene, she began to churn the lethal waters, and whilst on the masonry of that charnel shore that was not of earth, the Titan thing from the stars slavered and gibbered like Polypheme, cursing this fleeing ship of Odysseus, and then bolder than the storied Cyclops, great Cthulhu slid greasily into the water and began to pursue with vast wave-racing strokes of cosmic potency. Bryden looked back and went mad, laughing shrilly, as he kept on laughing at intervals, like death found him one night in the cabin, whilst Johansen was wandering garrulously. But Johansen had not given out yet, knowing that the thing could surely overtake the Alert until steam was fully up. He resolved on a desperate chance, and setting the engine for full speed, ran lightning-like on deck and reversed the wheel. There was a mighty eddying and foaming in the noisome brine, and as the steam mounted higher and higher, the brave Norwegian drove his vessel head-on against a pursuing jelly, which rose above the unclean froth like the stern of a demon galleon. The awful squid-head writhing feelers came nearly up to the bowsprit of the sturdy yacht. But Johansen drove on relentlessly. There was a bursting as of an exploding bladder, a slushy nastiness as of a cloven sunfish, a stench of 1,000 open graves, and a sound that the chronicler would not put on paper. For an instant the ship was befouled by an acrid and blinding green cloud, and then there was only a venomous seething astern where, God in heaven, the scattered plasticity of that nameless sky spawn was nebulously recombining in its hateful original form, whilst its distant widened every second as the Alert regained impetus from its mounting steam. That was all. After that, Johansen only brooded over the idol in the cabin, and attended to a few matters of food for himself and the laughing maniac by his side. He did not try to navigate the first bold flight, for the reactions had taken something out of his soul. Then came the storm of April 2nd, and a gathering of clouds about his consciousness. There is a sense of spectral whirling through liquid gulfs of infinity, of dizzying rides through reeling universes on a comet's tail, and of hysterical plunges from the pit of the moon, and from the moon back again to the pit, all livened by a cachinnating chorus of distorted, hilarious elder gods and the green, bat-winged, mocking imps of Tartarus. Out of that dream came rescue, the Vigilant, the Vice-Admiralty Court, the streets of Dunedin, and the long voyage back home to the old house by the Aberg. He could not tell. They would think him mad. He would write what he knew before death came, but his wife must not guess. Death would be a boon, if only it could blot out the memories. That was the document I read, and now I have placed it in a tin box beside the bas-relief and the papers of Professor Angell. With it shall go this record of mine, this test of my own sanity, wherein is pieced together that which I hope may never be pieced together again. I have looked upon all that the universe has to hold of horror, and even the skies of spring and the flowers of summer must ever afterward be poison to me. But I do not think my life will be long, as my uncle went, as poor Johansen went, so I shall go. I know too much, and the cult still lives. Cthulhu still lives too, I suppose, again in the chasm of stone which has shielded him since the sun was young. His accursed city is sunken once more, for the Vigilant sailed over the spots after the April storm. But his ministers on earth still bellow and prance and slay around idol-capped monoliths in lonely places. He must have been trapped by the sinking, whilst within his black abyss, or else the world would by now be screaming with frightened frenzy. Who knows the end? What has risen may sink, and what has sunk may rise. Loathsomeness waits and dreams in the deep, and decay spreads over the tottering cities of man. A time will come, but I must not and cannot think. Let me pray that if I do not survive this manuscript, my executors may put caution before audacity, and see that it meets no other eye. The end. Woof. Woof, woof, woof. And that is the end of H.P. Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu. Did you like it? That was good, Kitra. I'm glad you liked it. Thank you. I hope I was able to narrate it with feeling. Woof. Thank you for reading it to us. Of course, Obsidian Moon. It was a pleasure. I've promised you for a while, after all, that I would read you a story. Now, unfortunately, there were no hot anime boys in this one. Yes, you did, Woof. Thank you, darling. I'm glad you all enjoyed it. I'm very glad indeed. Hello, Sonny. Hello, darling. Hello, Kate Ferris. That was great, thank you. I'm so happy we got a reading stream. I really need to save the VOD so I can revisit this. Yeah. That's quite soothing. I'm very happy to hear you say so, Carrie. Hot tentacle anima, boys. Yes. We've got Azza, right? This is Azza's backstory. He's Azathoth, though, right? He's not Cthulhu. Azathoth is different. He's a great old one in space. They call him the blind idiot god. But that's not a negative thing. It's more like, I don't know. I don't know how to describe Azathoth. We'll read the story for him another time. Yes. You want to talk to me? I'm sorry. I don't usually do private conversations with people I don't know. Mainly because I'm a rather busy person. But you may feel free to join our Discord. You can write to me, and I might respond. But I'm unfortunately not open to longer private conversations. You would like another reading stream? I'm happy to hear it, Reina. What did Vera say? It was very relaxing. Maybe you want to do another one sometime. Yes, today was a great stream to listen to while working, Mary. Thank you. Of course, dear Spoopy. Of course. I'm happy to talk to everyone. Thank you, Zendrassen. I'm glad you think so. Can you read Frankenstein at some point? I really love it, and I can't find a good audiobook of it. Sure, Kitro. This was not even expensive, Mike. My mic is expensive. I think so, at least. Got the Shure SM7B. That's the one the White House uses. Yes. I'd love to hear more. Hear you read The Raven. I think I've read The Raven before. Nevermore. I thought you used your smartphone. No, I use my webcam mic, Veras. Hello, Ruben. Dear dog Ami. Woof. You guys want to listen to some music? The story's done now, after all. Perhaps we might listen to some music together. Let me find some nice music. I'm just gonna put my headset on and find some nice music to listen to. Woof woof. Pog. I can't believe how short that story was. I thought it would be longer. Woof woof woof. I'm sorry over the past week or so I've not really been myself. I was again conscribed to write someone's lore video. And unfortunately, I was quite sad that my initial draft was rejected. Usually they're not. This time they were, which is understandable. Most stories are not, most stories are not written and accepted in only one draft. But I've been a bit spoiled, I suppose. But I rewrote it yesterday, and I delivered it. And today I was told that it's good. Today I was told that it's a good story and that it was now accepted. So I managed to do it on the second draft, which was good. Which also means that I am back to full power. Yes, I am back to full power. I feel mentally energetic again, and I'm very excited to stream more. And just in time as well, because tomorrow is a special stream, and Friday is an even more special stream. Friday we're going to debut a whole new outfit. But it's more than an outfit, Dog Army. It is more than an outfit. Make sure you all put your reminders on for this Friday at least, if not tomorrow. Tomorrow is our beautiful day when I shall do whatever I please. Yes. It's going to be pretty poggers, I would say so. I also have a collab. I have a collab with Sense and Jonah Scott. And we're going to be playing Zomboid on Thursday at 11 a.m. JST. Oh, I randomly pinged a message. That was not my intention. Unpin this message. There we go. Yeah, I caught Mary. Thank you for coming and saying hello. Dog Army. How are you all, my sweet adorable dogs? How are you all? Woof. Are you doing alright? Are you sitting comfortably? Are you happy? Hello, Dr. Dirty Dishwater. Hello, Ania. Kaya, darling. I'm doing good. Happy to hear it. I got more work today, though. Oh, I see. Hello, Xiaofan. Chisanashi, Bear, Dreamfire. Vegas, darling. Retski, good to see you again, Retski. Very happy to see you again. And work on my new model continues. Hello, Sorry. How are you today, darling? How are you? Hello, Nebula. Merpini, little hybrid. I'm getting a new model soon. Very excited for it. It's hard not to spoil it. Good, I'm bleaching my hair. Hope you're well too. I am very well, Sorry. I'm very happy to hear you are enjoying your day. Woof. I am debuting a new model. It should be at the start of March, with no delays. I'm very excited for it. I'm also quite nervous. It is the first time I'm getting a new model, an entirely new model, with a new artist and everything. From scratch. It is the first time in over a year, I think. Yes. It is the first time in over a year when I'm getting a new model. Yes, I actually feel quite positive about how it looks. I'm quite excited. I think you guys will like it a lot. It's a 2D model. I think everyone will like it very much. Excited to see it. I'm glad to hear it anyhow. Yes. But it is my mom's birthday today. And so I can unfortunately not stay too long. I shall have to send you all on your ways. And I will see you all again very soon. Yeah. See you all again very soon. So for today, I think it would be good to raid Uzuri Mia. Yes. Let's raid Uzuri Mia. There we go. Happy birthday, Mary's mom. Mama weather. Wow, we had a good amount of viewers today, actually, considering I was reading a story. I was very scared that there would be like 100 people here, and they would just be bored out of their minds. But I'm very happy that so many people came to chat with me. Thank you for coming and listening. Thank you very much. I very much appreciate it. Thank you. And I will see you all again soon, tomorrow, at the usual time. I'm very excited for it already. Yeah. Sonic, thank you for the tier 1s up to Blue Bite Sora. Thank you very much, Sonic Addict. Alright, everyone. I shall see you all soon. Good night, Dog Army. Sleep tight. I'll see you tomorrow. Woof woof. Woof.